Thank you so much, Debbie. I love being married, and I am indebted to the Lord for giving me a wife to share life with. But not simply that He's given to me a wife, but specifically that the wife that He's given to me is Caroline. And though I love her from the absolute depths of my heart, this is true. I hate to ride with her. And you know what's true for her? She hates to ride with me. And neither of us is satisfied with the driving of the other. And so consequently, we are saying things to each other about our driving when we're riding together. So let's say, for example, if I am driving, Caroline operates under the assumption that I am driving essentially with the help of a seeing eye dog. That there is a dog out running in front of me because I cannot see anything. And so I hear things like, "You see that car backing out, don't you? You see that lady crossing the street. You see that pothole. You see that light is green. You see that light is red." And so regularly she's saying to me the things that do you see this? And invariably I say yes. And so in all honesty and candor, that aggravates me. And so, one good turn deserves another. And so when I ride with Caroline, she gets to hear me say some things as well. For example, Caroline, we could disconnect the speedometer on her van today, and it would be of no consequence to her. And the reason is because Caroline drives just based on feel. If she's on a particular road and traffic is going along, she's just driving and she's thinking, this feels about the right speed. The problem is that the right feeling speed is generally somewhere in the 10 to 15 mile an hour range above the speed limit. And so she hears me say things like, "You better slow down a little bit, you're going to get a ticket. You better watch the speed limits. Cops like to watch this road." So she hears that from me. But there's something that I do when she's driving that is perhaps even more aggravating. And she experiences this because I would describe Caroline as a late breaker. A late breaker. And it's not that she doesn't come to a stop, it's just that she does not give me any indication early enough that she is going to stop. And so I don't know if your car is nice enough or fancy enough to be equipped with one of these, but our cars are really nice and fancy. We have these imaginary brakes over on the passenger side. And some of your vehicles may have one of those, and ours do. And how it works is that we're driving along, and I'll see that somebody is pulling out, and I won't say anything, but just kind of instinctively, my foot will go over. Or that the light I see ahead is red, and she still has her foot on the gas pedal, and I'm thinking, we're going to... And so I press this imaginary brake. That gets on her last nerves. And though I'm not saying anything about it, she can see my foot sliding over to press this imaginary brake, and it just drives her crazy. Long story short, I hate to ride with Caroline. She hates to ride with me because I don't think she can drive. She doesn't think I can drive. But you know what? When push comes to shove, what we really think? Everything would be okay if I would drive just like her. Everything would be okay with me if she would drive just like me. The truth is, from each of our perspective, wouldn't it be a perfect world if those around us did things just the way that we did them? Because when push comes to shove, we do things the way that we do them because we think that way is right. If we thought there was a better way, we'd be doing it, right? So when push comes to shove, we may hate to admit this, but we really believe this to be true. How I do things, that's the right way. It's the best way. Everybody else, I wish they'd just catch up to speed. We're like that with our spouses. We're like that with our kids. We're like that with coworkers. We're like that with fellow students and classmates. We're like this with everybody. But as followers of God, we're also that way with the Lord. Because if God would just do things how we know and think that they should be done, the world would be a perfect place. And so constantly, God is hearing from us. Repeatedly, He is hearing from us, asking Him to work and to move in particular ways. God, I want you to do this, then I want you to do that, then I want you to do this, then I want you to do that. If God would just do things our way. Several weeks ago, we began this series of messages that I've entitled, I Wish. What if God did things your way? What if God did things my way? Here's the question I want you to think about today. Why is it that we want that? Why, in truth, do we really want God to do things our way? Because we do, don't we? That's why we're asking God, God, will you do this? God, will you do that? Because we want Him to do things our way. But why is it that we want that? Well, it's because we're operating under some false notions, some faulty suppositions that you see in 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8, if you would look with me in your Bibles there this morning. We'll actually deal with the entire chapter, but we won't read all of it at the outset. So if you would just leave your Bibles there open, 1 Samuel chapter 8, we'll start reading with verse 1. 1 Samuel chapter 8 verse 1 says, "Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, 'Look, you are old, your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations.' But this displeased Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge us.' So Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, 'Heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you. For they've not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they've forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them.'" What you have here going on in the life of the nation of Israel, the people of God, they want God to do things how they want them. And this really is a case study for us and a glaring example of the reasons why, quite frankly, we are like them. Why is it that we want God to do things our way? Well, oftentimes it's because of some faulty notions that we've got in our minds, some presuppositions that are just simply incorrect. And here's the first one. Any change is a good thing. Any change is a good thing. As you pick up this passage here in verse 1 of chapter 8, Samuel is the prophet of God. He's the man that is leading the nation as a judge. And at this point, that's how the nation was structured. It was led by judges, of whom Samuel had served in that capacity. Samuel has been and remains to this day one of the great heroes, not simply of the Old Testament, but of all the Bible. He's a man shot through with character and integrity. He's a man that loves God, that follows God, that's serious in his walk with the Lord. He wants people to know and have a real relationship with the Lord and to take His law seriously. I mean, to this very day, he's just a classic example of the type of follower that God is looking for. But Samuel, at this point, he's getting old. He's getting well advanced in years. The effects of aging are beginning to take its toll on his body, and he can't do what he used to do. Beyond that, the workload is increasing. And beyond that, Samuel recognizes, I'm not going to live forever this side of heaven. I've got to do something. And so we're told that he made his sons judges over Israel. He had these two sons, and it was kind of like a test case. In the area of Beersheba, he put his sons in charge, and so that disputes and that type of thing, they would all be settled and led by his two sons in Beersheba. This would be a good proving ground for them, so that once I'm dead and gone, then my sons will be able to lead. Israel will be in good shape. Unfortunately, though, we're told in verse 3 that his sons did not walk in his ways. They might have looked like their father, they might have spoken like their father, but they did not behave like their father. These were not God-fearing, godly men. In fact, we're told that they turned aside after dishonest gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. They were scoundrels. I mean, these are the types of guys back then that we would put in Congress today, right? So that's what they had leading them in this area. And so the people recognize that this is a problem. It comes as no surprise seeming to Samuel. He recognizes that this is a problem. They are perverting the justice system. It's just greasing people's palms or taking money so that people can be happy and they can buy positions, they can buy influence, or they can buy particular decisions. And the people are disgruntled with this. And they come to Samuel. In verse 4, the leadership of Israel comes to Samuel and they say, in verse 5, this is not, just for the record, this is not a good way to begin a conversation with a senior adult. Look how it says it. Look, you are old. Not a good way to do this. Anyway, so they begin this conversation with Samuel, and they state the obvious. Samuel, you are one old dude. Beyond that, your sons don't walk in your ways. Now, they've had a chance. They've had this opportunity to prove themselves. But these are shysters. We know that they're your sons, but these guys ought to be in jail. They ought not be in positions of leadership. So what we need you to do, you see the key phrase at the end of verse 5, now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. So what are they wanting Samuel to do? What are they saying that we need? What are they wanting? They want a king. Now, are they saying to Samuel, listen, we've got a problem. You know, under your leadership, this whole system of having a judge has been a great thing. You've been a godly example, a man shot through with character and integrity. But your sons don't demonstrate this. We've got a problem. We need to see if somehow we can fix this. Do they ask for new integrity-filled judges? No. Do they say, Samuel, listen, we've been thinking about this and we've really sought the counsel of the Lord and we feel like God is wanting to lead this nation in a different direction under a different system of leadership. Do they say that? No. They just say, we got bad judges in your sons. We just need to throw all that entire system out, and what we need now is to establish ourselves as a monarchy. We need ourselves a king. So that would fall under your job, so you go and find us a king. The nation of Israel at this point they're on the cusp of making a generationally regrettable decision in pressing to have things their way. They have just decided, not because they have sought the counsel of God. In fact, they had asked God for a king earlier, and God said, listen, you don't need a king, I will be your king. So they know what God has already said about this, but they still go to the prophet and say, this is what we need. We have got to have a king because there's problems, there's trouble in paradise, we have bad leadership, and so we've just got to do and get rid of all of this because they're operating under this notion. All change, any change, that's a good thing. But you know what? It's not. Not all change is good. I remember at my home church years ago, I was probably in high school at this point. We had a pastor who, well, he wasn't a really good guy, and he made a lot of terrible decisions. But I remember there was one Sunday where he preached this message on ruts and how as individuals we get trapped in ruts and we do things the same way day in, day out, year out, and we're just doing all these things and we're expecting different results, but we don't get them because we're doing the same things over and over and over again. Beyond that, not only are people individually caught and trapped in ruts, so many times also in churches we wind up trapped in our ruts. Every week we do the same thing the same way, and week in, week out, year in, year out, and we never see God do anything significant because we're doing the same things, the same old ways, getting the same old tired results. And so, obviously, there was truth in this message, but the next Sunday, and for a period of weeks until the wheels just fell off of this, things were done differently. And nobody had any idea. When the service began on that particular Sunday, there was a call to worship, and I don't know if the choir sang it or the congregation did, but as soon as the call to worship was over, people sat down, and the preacher stood up and preached. And as soon as he'd finished the message, there was an invitation. But then once the invitation was over, the service wasn't done. Then, like, the choir would sing, and then the congregation would sing, and then there would be, the very last thing that we would do before we left was an offertory. It was a terrible mess. You know why? Well, among other reasons, once you have heard the message, and once you have gotten to or near or to the end of the invitation, do you know what you're thinking? What are we eating for lunch today? Here in just a minute, we'll be leaving. Now, once you get the invitation, mentally you have checked out, and you've been through all this other stuff, and so you're just accustomed. Once we get the invitation, we're through. And so we would have people leaving because, from their perspective, at this point, church is already over. People had mentally checked out. They're not singing. They're not participating. They're just kind of sitting there, okay, is this not done yet? And it was an absolute colossal mess. Well, why did we do that? Was it just to prove a point? Well, no, it was a mess because the pastor decided and was operating under this notion. I'm not going to seek and decide what God wants, what He knows is best. I just recognize that there's a problem, and so we're just going to change everything, and all change, that's good. Just change it up, and that fixes everything. But it doesn't, because it doesn't deal with the problem. So many times, and we see this on a variety of different levels in the course of people's lives, you see so many marriages that end, and couples, just by nature of the fact that we are imperfect, and within the context of a marriage, you'll have a husband and a wife, and they get to a rough patch, and they get to this stage either because of communication problems, financial problems, relation problems, whatever, and so they get to this point, they get to this place, and one or both, they finally decide, you know what, we just need to call this quits. I don't wish you any ill, you don't wish me any will. We just need to call this quits. This marriage is over. And what we really need to do, we just need to change spouses. We need to go find somebody else so then we can experience happiness and meaning and purpose in life. Let's just throw everything out and just start all over because why? Well, the notion is, as it was for the people of Israel, as it so often is for us, any change is a good thing. Why do we want God to do things so many times so differently than how they're currently going? Because we, like Israel, are operating under that false notion. Any change is a good thing. And you know what? Not every change. In fact, not even most changes are a good thing. But there was another notion that they were operating on that was false, which is this. The behavior of others is the best judge. The behavior of others is the best judge. Look in verse 5. And at the end of that verse, you see that the key statement. They said, now make us a king. But that's not where they stop. They say, make us a king to judge us how? Like all the nations. So they have in their minds, we have conceived, we concocted, this is the perfect way that we need to be structured as a nation. This is what type of system that we need to have in place. We need to transition from this idea of having prophets and judges. We need to go to a monarchical-based government. Why? Well, you see their motivation. To judge us how? Like all the nations. Israel is coming and the leadership is coming to Samuel and they're saying, listen, we're Israel. We're God's chosen people, chosen among the nations of the world. How can we be respectable among the nations of the world if we don't even have a king? Look at the Philistines, look at the Amalekites, look at the Moabites, look at all of these nations around us. We are surrounded by nations, and how are they structured? How are they governed? Well, they've got kings. Well, if they've got kings, it must be working. Maybe we've got some problems, and so we need to have a king too. Why? Because everybody else is doing it. Isn't that what they're saying? And not simply are they saying everybody else is doing it. This notion is founded on this misguided concept that what other people are doing, that's the best judge of what I should be doing. Especially in clothing and fashion, there are all sorts of fads and generational fads. And, every few years it's something new and different, whether it's shoes, it's pants, it's shirts, it's blouses, it's hairstyle, it's whatever. There's all these different fads. And I was born in 75, so the early 80s are my formative years. And those of you who remember those times or had kids growing up in those times, perhaps you remember one of the fads of the early 80s for girls was to wear those Jellies shoes. Do you remember those? Now, for those of you that weren't alive or don't remember them or weren't paying attention at that point, especially among young girls, early adolescents, these jellies were really popular. The good thing about them is that jellies were cheap because they were just made out of plastic. They were these vinyl shoes that were they were just slide-on shoes made out of vinyl. They were in these pastel colors. They weren't especially nice. They weren't especially beautiful. They were the rage, and so all the girls had these things. My sister had them, and classmates when I was in school, these girls wore those as well. Anyway, when I got to college one day, I was talking with a friend, and we were talking about some of the fads and the things that used to be popular when we were growing up. And this girl she's a beautiful girl, and she's probably, I'd say, somewhere around 6'1". And we were talking about that stage when jellies were popular. And if you are a female and you're in excess of 6 foot, do you know what's also true of you? You got big old feet. All right, and so she was talking about how when she was in elementary school and all these other girls had these jellies, she goes to get some jellies and she can't find any that really fit her feet very well. But everybody's got them, and she's determined she's going to have them as well. And so what she would do is get up early in the morning before school. She would pull her hairdryer out and she would heat these plastic shoes up to the point where they were malleable enough to get her big old foot in there. And she said it was terrible, day in and day out. I'd come home, my feet would just be killing me. In elementary school, my feet are covered in blisters. But I didn't care because I had those shoes just like everybody else. Now, why was she doing that? Because she was operating even in elementary school on this simple premise. What other people are doing, that's the best judge of what I should be doing. But the truth is, God never wants us to operate on that notion. Why? Because God, in His revealed Word and how He speaks to us through His Spirit, He alone ultimately knows what is the absolute best for us. He wants to communicate that to us. In fact, He had told the nation of Israel, listen, you don't need a king, I will be your king. But they decided, you know what, we've got to be like everybody else. And how everybody else is, that's ultimately right. And so we're going to let them judge our behavior. We're going to let them dictate our desires. And so that's the path that we need to go. What the nation of Israel did then, so too the people of God too often do today. And that is, we want and we expect, we desire God to do things our way, not only because we think just any change is good, but because we're thinking, what other people are doing, that's the best judge of what I should be doing. But again, it's a faulty notion. But there's a final false conception that the people of God had, which is this: my perspective is greater than God's. My perspective is greater than God's. Samuel has heard the inquiry of the people, the request. They say, Samuel, make us a king to judge us like all the nations. They don't even come to him and say, well, what do you think about this? They're not asking, they're coming in dictating. Samuel, you're old, your sons stink, get us a king so we can be like everyone else. And we're told this in verse 6, this displeased Samuel. And he's ticked off. He knows red flags are going up everywhere. He knows this is a colossally bad idea. But instead of lambasting and castigating them, he goes and he talks to the Lord. And he prays in verse 6 to the Lord, and God responds to Samuel, and He says to him, heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you. Samuel, they're saying do this. Go ahead and do this. But I want you to be okay, because they're not rejecting you, Samuel. It's because they're rejecting me. And quite frankly, this is what they have been doing ever since I brought them out of Egypt. But in verse 9, he gives to Samuel a command. He says, however, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them. So he says, go ahead and give them what they want, but before you do that, I want you to give them very clear and explicit warning as to what the consequences of this are going to be. And starting in verse 11, you begin to see what the consequences are. Samuel tells the people, listen, the behavior of the king who will reign over you will be like this. He'll take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots and to be his horsemen, and some to run before his chariots. And it's not simply that they'll be drafted in the military, but they're going to be drafted into his personal service. You'll have a king, you'll technically have freedom, but the truth is, so many of you, you're going to be functioning as personal slaves to the king. Beyond that, he talks in verse 12 about appointing captain over his thousands and over his 50s. And beyond that, some set to plow his ground and reap his harvest, some to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. Listen, you're going to be conscripted to do all kinds of stuff. Some to serve in the military. Others, you're just going to be forced. Your job day in, day out is to plow the king's fields. Others, their job day in, day out is to make wheels for chariots. Every day, it doesn't make a difference if that's what you want to do, whether you feel gifted or called to that. That's going to be what you do for the king. In verse 13, he says, he'll take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. And so some of you are going to go to the Estee Lauder shop. Some of you are going to work for Paula Deen. Some of you are going to be working in the bakery. You're going to be doing all this stuff, not because you want to, but because you have to, because you get yourself a king. Beyond that, he says he'll take, in verse 14, the best of your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves, and give them to his servants. You may have a great garden. You may have this enormous ranch with all kinds of produce and crops and stuff coming in. And you're going to have some great years, but know this, the king's going to take the best stuff that you have, he's going to give it to his servants. What do you think about that? Beyond that, he says he'll take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage. He'll give it to his officers and servants. He'll take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men, your donkeys, and put them to his work. He says in verse 17, he'll take a tenth of your sheep, and you will be his servants. So you're going to have an absolute decrease in freedom. You're You're going to have far less money in your pocket. You're going to have far less option, far less choice. You're going to be operating under the thumb of this king. And listen to what he says in verse 18. He says, "And you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves." And so Samuel, the mouthpiece of God, is telling this to the Lord's people. This is what you want. And if you get this, I promise you, you can write it down. The day is coming. You will rue. You will hate this day. You will so regret this decision. You're going to be calling out and saying, God, this is so awful. This is so burdensome. This is so oppressive. This stinks. Will you help us? And what does God say? And the Lord will not hear you in that day. So God is saying to them, you want this? It's going to be terrible. And I'm telling you, write this down. This is how it's going to unfold. It's going to stink. You're going to be pleading for help, and help will not come. I remember what it was like learning to ride my bicycle. And I was 16, 17 years old. And but I had this bicycle that my grandfather, I don't even know if he got it at a yard sale or got it out of somebody's trash. I mean, it was an absolute clunker of a bike. It didn't even have inflatable wheels. The tires, it was just hard rubber. But anyway, I was excited to get this thing, and I wanted to learn to ride my bike. And I just decided I didn't need to ask anybody. And so my designed method for learning to ride my bike, what I figured out was the best way was to go out in the backyard, and we had our driveway kind of curved behind the house. And so I would start on the concrete, but then once I got pedaling, then I would go into the grass because our yard kind of sloped gently down. And so that would give me some forward momentum. And even though I was little, I understood this. It's a lot better to fall on grass than it is on asphalt or concrete. And so if I'm going to fall, and I'm going to fall, I'd much rather fall on the grass. So that was my plan. And I began this process, and I start going down, and I would fall, and I'd get up, I'd start again. I'm getting frustrated, but bit by bit, I'm learning, and I'm gaining my balance. And finally, I'm getting to the point I can navigate going through the grass. And I figured, if I can do this on the grass, I can do this on the sidewalk, I can do this on the driveway, I can do this in the road. What's interesting, though, is that my parents never got me training wheels. And I don't know why they never said anything about training wheels, because the neat thing about training wheels is this. They give a little boy or they give a little girl the opportunity to ride their bike and have fun, but also it gives them the opportunity to learn balance without breaking their neck, right? Because it lets them go a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, but not so far that they'll fall. Not so far that they'll tip over to the side. And so the goal is increasingly through that to learn balance so that you're not having to lean on them. But if you get into trouble, you lean too far to the right, you lean too far to the left, what does the training wheel do? It holds you up and keeps you from falling. Too many of us have this notion in our minds. God is like a cosmic set of training wheels. Now, we've got this freedom to make decisions and choices, and we can make these decisions and choices, and God will grant us that freedom. But if we lean a little bit too far to the left, He's going to kick in and right us so that we don't fall. If we lean too far to the right and we're starting to make a mess, He's going to fix everything, and He's going to put us back up right the way that we should be so that we don't fall. Is that what God was doing here? What is He saying? He's saying, this is going to stink. This is what you want. You want to have it your way? I will let you have it your way. The day will come that you will ask for help, that you'll be expecting to lean on me as this set of cosmic training wheels, but you're going to fall. You're going to get hurt. You may not like this, but it's the simple truth. God, in making us volitional creatures and giving us the capacity to make decisions and choices, not only gives us the ability to make those decisions and choices, but He also frees us and liberates us to experience the consequences of those decisions and choices. And too many Christians think that God is going to work like this set of training wheels, and He's going to always fix and make everything right, that His power is going to kick in at the last minute to keep us on track. But understand this, God wants you to do what is right, period. He'll give you everything you need to make the right decision, but He's not going to make you do it. And if you choose unwisely, if you decide, you know what, I don't care what God thinks is best, I think I know what is best, He'll let you do it. And what happened? In verse 21, and Samuel in verse 19, nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but we will have a king over us." Now, God has just given them a detailed forecast of their future if they have a king. And they say what? No, we will have a king over us. So they're at the end of the statement, they're saying, this is our decision, this is our choice, we're going to have a king. But notice how that statement begins. They say no. What are they saying? What God has said will happen, it won't. What we know, our perspective, that's better than God's. And so many times we want God to do things our way because we don't have it settled, or we do have it settled in our minds that we're so smart, we've got such great depth of perspective, such great discernment. Well, regardless of what He has said to us, it's going to be okay. I want you to understand that God does not want to keep His ways a secret from you. And just as He warned His people then, so too, especially in the counsel of His Word, He has provided us warning of what the future is going to be like. You're thinking about going into and experiencing significant debt, God tells you what that's going to be like. You're thinking about violating your marital vows and engaging in adultery, God says this is what that's going to be like. You're thinking about dating and then marrying someone that's outside the faith, someone that's a non-Christian, God says this is what it's going to be like. God's not trying to keep it a secret from you, but when you decide, well, it doesn't make any difference, this is still what I want, you're saying to the God of the universe, my perspective is better than yours. But you know what God says about it? He's revealed this in Isaiah 55. He says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. But then He says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts. This may be a bristling thought to you, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. God knows more than you do. God knows more than me. His perspective is one where He sees everything that has, is, and will occur. All you can see is this little bit that you've got with the blinders on in front of you. Not only do we operate and think different thoughts than He thoughts, but God is saying, listen, my thoughts and my ways are better. And if you'll just get that, then you'll quit saying, I wish, and start saying, Lord, what do you want? That's God's desire for His people then. That's His desire for His people today. The question is that your desire? I want you to bow your heads with me.